Hi, this is Roger, thanks for dropping by. A little bit different this time, this video, endearingly titled One of Each. I'll explain. You can choose whether you stay or not. I'm watering, or the plan is to water everything in here today, so that's all the pots, holy clay pots, mounts, the lot. The only orchids that probably won't get done today are the Phalaenopsis in the kitchen, because I do those as a separate thing. Everything's getting a flush, so I haven't got to muck about with feed. I'm currently waiting for my water, the kettle to boil, so that I can put some water in a separate container and then pour my RO water out into my bowl and put some hot water in it without diluting it with tap water, so that it warms up, because it's not long come in from outside, because I've had the RO unit on, so I don't like using cold water, so it'll be tepid, as they say. And what do I mean by one of each then? I'm watering everything, so as I go round, each type of orchid that I've got, now in some cases I might only have one, in which case we'll have a look at that one, but if I've got a lot, I'll just pick one at random basically. So we'll have a look at a Restrepia, a Masdevallia, several different types of oncidiums, but we'll look at several, like 3 or 4, several different types of dendrobiums. We'll have a look at one of each. You see what I'm getting at? One coelogeny, we'll have a look at one. And we'll just go round like that as I go. So there'll be, the video in its entirety will be a bit bitty. I mean, I'll fade in and fade out each plant basically, so there'll be relatively short clips per plant, and I'm not going to go into like a complete care guide or anything for each one that we stop on today, because the video will be, well, 8 foot long, won't it? But we'll have a quick chat about them and whether they are the sort of orchids that are currently doing well in my environment or not. And if they're not, what do I plan on doing about it? As I said, I'm looking at plans for next winter now, and part of that planning is what gets to stay, because it's done okay through this winter, including a very, very cold spell. So that's the plan for today. So as I said, the video clips will come and go. We'll have a look at each one as I go. And I've put the camera off to one side today because I need to come in and out frequently, because I don't do this all in one go, I have breaks. Coffee and biscuit breaks this time of day. So anyway, let's get going. Right, first one up is one of my larger Restrepias. This is Restrepia sanguinea. With an A in quotes, capital A, so it's one of Burnham's own, I suspect, that got awarded at some point in the past. Haven't had this a ridiculously long time. Got potted up in my mix, and I do believe, looking at it, there is some cocoa husk in there, so that'll need sorting out at an appropriate time. I don't want to leave it in that too long. It's growing well at the moment. Things with Restrepias, they like high humidity, they like a little bit of airflow but not a draft, and they're not too keen on heat. So, you know, they are basically a cooler grower and quite a shady grower. They don't need bright light. They will put up with some, but they don't need it, if you see what I mean. Now this, I'm glad I've got one on this plant, I think it's the only one. This is what happens with dehydration. Now that can be one of two things. There's not enough hydration coming in at the roots, or the air's too dry. Air too dry when they're warm is quite easy. In cooler temperatures, the humidity value that your meter would read doesn't need to be as high, because it's a percentage game. It's relative, as they say, relative humidity. But that's a sign of dehydration. It's the equivalent of the Oncidium concertina leaves, except for these do it differently, and they often stop the leaf opening altogether. But the rest of the new leaves on here are fine, so that was something that happened as a temporary thing, probably, you know, not long after it was repotted. So keep them cool, keep them relatively shady. Don't let them go totally dry. They've got a very fine root system, and it is the sort of root system where the constantly moist expression actually is real. Don't let them get totally dry. The roots will just frazzle, they'll just shrivel. And then when you re-wet the media, the roots just don't work. And they don't look any different. The dead ones look almost identical to the good ones. Most Restrepia's live roots are a whitish colour. They do show up. Anyway, so that's Restrepia's. Burnham's have probably the largest selection of both hybrids and species. I don't know whether they're all on their website to buy online, but certainly when you go there, there's a massive selection. And they're not ridiculously expensive compared with some other orchids. So if you grow cool, you know, these are a good bet. As long as you can give them a reasonable amount of humidity, they should do well. The blooms are not massive, but very attractive. So there we go. That's a look at just the one. Right, this is one of my Miltoniopsis that objected to being repotted, but it's recovering. It's growing some new roots, and it's got quite a strong new growth coming up here, providing it doesn't rot, and another one here. Miltoniopsis, not necessarily a good plant for in the home, because they really like it cool, and they also like good humidity, and these need some airflow. They don't like still static air, they like some air movement. So they're not that easy to accommodate in the home. They suffer from any form of stress. It will, you know, it will stall them. In some cases it will take the plant down. But another one of these that if it gets totally dry, it's not the end of the world, but it definitely shouldn't last for any length of time. Their roots are not that fine. They've got some substance to them, so they will put up with a little bit of drought on the grounds they do have pseudobulbs. So they have storage organs, yeah? So even though the roots might be totally dry, the plant isn't necessarily, but not for any length of time. And the only time really they should go dry like that is when they're not doing anything, i.e. there's no growth going on. Now this one is currently growing slowly, so it will get some water. It has become almost dry, but you have to bear in mind you've got a clear pot here. You look at the bark, this is in, very little else. There's a little bit of cocoa husk in there, but tiny amount. It's virtually all bark. So when you look at your bark and it looks this pale colour, you think, oh, that's dry. What do you think it's like in the middle of the pot? I doubt if it's dry in there. Yeah? And there is a clue down the bottom. There are some dark pieces. So it hasn't gone totally dry yet, even though it might look it. So again, they don't like bright light. They like to stay cool. And they like a buoyant atmosphere, so they don't like the humidity too high, and if you're going to have higher humidity they need that air movement to keep it circulating. So but gorgeous flowers, virtually all fragrant, and I'll let you into a little secret at this point. That says Miltoniopsis hybrid. I've lost all of my species and one of my primary crosses. Well, it was a cross back to the species. Lost them all. They've all gone during this winter. Some went before the winter, so they didn't do well. They didn't do well at all. I'm hoping that the hybrids have a little bit more vigour and will do okay. And I may attempt to get some species again. The Vexillaria was doing actually very well, and it rotted. It got rot in it, so it didn't actually die because it was potted badly or anything like that. It just got that orangey coloured rot in it and it just went down quickly. So anyway, that's a hybrid, and I will probably stick to the stronger going hybrids. I will always have some Miltoniopsis, I love them, but they are a little difficult. So that's one of those. Right, another one in the Oncidium Alliance. The Miltoniopsis is in the Oncidium Alliance. This is a genuine Odontoglossum in the Oncidium Alliance. And strictly speaking would have been reclassified as Oncidium, I'm sure. This is Odontoglossum Golden Rialto, and I've been struggling with this for a long time. Originally came from McBean's as a lovely, strong, healthy plant in bloom. And like an idiot, because I paid quite a bit for it, it frightened me and I left it in the pot too long. What I didn't realise is the McBean's and now Mathers Foundation, Jim has a system whereby the plants get repotted on a regular basis, depending on a whole shelf of possibly thousands of plants, at least hundreds. So they get done on a regular basis, even though they're quite heavy on their media. His media that he uses is quite heavy on sphagnum moss. But because it's recycled round and they're not potted hard, he just folds the media in gently around the roots and he knocks them out at a rate of knots. It looks like there's no care and attention going on at all, but there is. That's years and years worth of experience going on there. But nonetheless, the media is quite important to these to stay fresh. And I was frightened to repot it in case I disturbed it or killed it, or and it just worried me. And what I didn't realise was the plant I had bought, because of the stage it was at, it was in its last year. It should have been repotted after blooming, in that sort of period there, and it didn't. It got left in the pot and it took the roots down, and it's taken this long to get it to recover. But it is now, that is a reasonable growth. That's not bad at all. If that growth attempts to bloom, I'm still not going to let it. I want another one with the equivalent roots. It has grown some roots now, so it's recovered, it's coming on okay. Odontoglossums, and I'll include Nellie Isla in that group because they are cool growers at the end of the day. Cool growing, don't like bright light, they don't like stale media, and they like a buoyant atmosphere again. They don't like getting blasted with a fan though. I've got a friend that grows a lot of these and he says a fan can be their downfall. It's got to be gentle and round about, not whack on the plant with all the leaves bent over. They don't like fans. Effectively, they've got very, very thin leaves, and a fan takes the moisture away from the plant. So if you're going to have quite high airflow, if you've got quite high airflow, then you need higher humidity to stop these dehydrating. Anyway, it's recovering. I've worked hard on it simply because I love the blooms. So, an Odontoglossum. I'll show this one as an example. This is Dendrobium Phalaenopsis type. This is Thailand black. I'd like to say it was, but it is hanging on. It does not like the cold at all, but it has two canes on it. This one looks like it's starting to rot, but it's not, it's firm. It's just discoloured. This one is also probably finished growing now. It's probably not going to grow anymore. This is never going to do well here because it's too cold. If I could get it in the house somewhere sensible, then it might pick up. But I've just cut one cane off that was starting to feel soft. All the canes that are left are firm. Now, as I said, I'm not sure why I'm showing you this, because this is going to Carol, if it's still alive in the middle of January. I suspect it will be, because it has got some roots, and I am keeping it quite dry. It's just going to get a trickle now as I water. So I'm not letting the roots get soggy, the roots that it's got, and there are some. So as dendrobiums go with the longer canes, because some of these can be massive, this is nowhere near as big as it should be, quite honestly. The canes should be at least twice the size on this particular variety. But all of my Phalaenopsis types are going to Carol. There's no point in keeping them here, they're not going to do well. There is one exception that's a monster. It's nearly 1 metre tall, and it's so strong and vigorous, it's fighting through the cold. It's stopped growing, but it's not going downhill. So I will keep that one. But the smaller ones, the ones that are not doing so well, they need warmth. As I said, if I could get them in the house somewhere, like say the bathroom windowsill, they might pick up. But I'm trying to get rid of the things that don't do well in here. I don't really want orchids all over the house. So the Phalaenopsis type like to stay warm. They will have periods of growth and periods when they're not growing at all. When they're not growing at all, keep the watering down, and they don't need feeding if they're not growing. So just water and enough to stop them shriveling. The warmer they are growing, the more likely they are to have something going on all the time. So you would water continuously. They like to dry a bit in between. Medium to bright light. Some say they bloom better in brighter light, but if you overcook it, you'll burn the leaves. So go steady. So a poor example of a Phalaenopsis type dendrobium. When I get round there, if I remember, I'll also film the big one to show the comparison between what they can be like and what they can be like when I get there, which is quite a way off. Right, this is it's a relatively new acquisition, Coelogene Moriana, which is one of the endearingly known as large whites. Not all Coelogenes have a white background to their blooms. Some of them are shades of brown or peachy colours. They vary, but there is a set of what are called large whites. Cristata is the sort of classic. But this is one of those. It was in bloom when I got it. It's highly likely to produce at least 3 new growths. These are the 3 new growths, 2 of which didn't bloom, but they will put strength into the plant by not blooming and should produce some nice big fat bulbs. Relatively recently repotted by Arthur at Burnham's at the beginning of the year, so it can stay in its pot at least all of next year, probably into the following year, because it will be in the bark that Burnham's use, which lasts well, and it probably hasn't got anything else in there apart from some polystyrene chips in the bottom, which they have a habit of doing with the larger plants. It's in a wider, shallower pot, ideally suited for a plant that's going to spread across the pot, which these do. Now, if you grow Coelogenes, again, they don't like bright light. Most of them are cooler growers, but go steady because some aren't. So check your species or content if it's a hybrid to see what you've got, because some of them are intermediate and even heading up to the warmer end of intermediate. So go steady. They're not all cool growers. Some of them are classed as cold growers. So yeah, so you need to check your individual plants. This set of circumstances I now find myself in is probably as near perfect for these as I'm ever going to get, so I will be getting more. Trouble is, there's an awful lot of them, don't half take up some space, they are monsters. But anyway, there's a little trick with these to cope with the heat of summer, because when it's hot and they're a cooler grower, they will stop. When they stop, if you water and feed them, you can damage your roots. You can lose some of your roots, and then you lose some of the strength of the plant. So feed and water well in the spring, especially if they're growing well, but then if it gets warm in the summer months, ease off and then start again in the autumn. And if they're not growing at all, then they don't need feed and they won't need much water. So adjust what you do to the plant, but watch those summer months. They can be challenging, to say the least. It's a good, strong, healthy plant, this one. I'm pleased with this. Well, that's why I bought it. As well as the blooms. And my original Cristata, which was the variety Lemoniana, went to Sean, Devon Orchid Society Sean. He had that one. It was in a big basket. And I have said to him, when you get a chance, repotting or a bit, well, I'd like a piece back again, because now I've got a set of circumstances where it will probably grow really well. So I'd like a piece back, and he said, no problem, I will get that sorted. I'm not going to ask when, because it'll be when it's convenient. And luckily with Sean, I can always meet him at our breakfast stop on the way to Burnham's or at Burnham's if I chose to visit when Devon Orchid Society had a meeting there, because he'd be there anyway. So no posting and packing and all that nonsense. So Coelogenes don't like bright light, and most of the time would be heavy drinkers. Basically, when they're growing well, active, they do drink a bit. So you need to just watch your watering and feeding with these. Yeah, good plants. They would grow in the home. They don't need the ridiculously high humidity that some orchids do, but they'd need a cool place to be. So, Coelogenes. I've always liked them, but they've never liked me that much. I'm hoping that we have an association from now on. Do we have an accord? What film's that from then? Right, Paphiopedilum, I have one. Relatively recent acquisition, got from Burnham's in bloom. I love the mottled leaves, but this is a false impression. If I'm going to get any more, I need to go very, very careful, because quite honestly, I only like the ones either with the mottled leaves or the ones that have multiple blooms on their spikes. Anything that's not that, I'm probably not interested in. The problem is, the ancient runes say the ones with the mottled leaves are warmer growers, so they're not going to do very well here in the winter, are they? But in amongst those are probably some cooler ones that just come from higher elevations. I've got to try and find them. Yeah. So I have one, and in that pot are 3 growths, 2 of which haven't bloomed that might. You have to bear in mind, as a plant progresses, the growths get bigger until it reaches blooming size, and once the growth has bloomed, it will often die back, having produced 1 or 2 new growths. Yeah, and then it'll die back. Now, this growth here that hasn't bloomed is producing a new leaf, so it's highly likely that can bloom. The other one over here, the smaller one, is not growing a new leaf and might have been the growth that the blooming one came from, in which case it probably won't bloom. So we will have to wait and see, but not too bright. These grow fine in the home. They don't need the ridiculously high humidity, and quite honestly you can get quite a good collection of paphs going in the home. They'll do okay. Out here I'm not so sure. This one is not showing any signs of any cold damage, and it's just been through the coldest period it's probably ever going to get. So if this one has survived this winter okay, then it sets a path for others to follow. So yeah, gorgeous bloom on it, Paphiopedilum blackjack. It's all in the name, you know. Anyway, that's my only one, and I did have some before, including a couple that Hannah tried to grow and failed, and I inherited them with virtually no roots. They took an age to just catch and start to recover. They went to other people that would probably do a better job on them. But we'll wait and see what's going to happen. If this survives this winter, then I may get some more. And I get them because I love the plant, not necessarily the blooms. So that's that one. Right, another Dendrobium type. This is a Latoria type. Now, I haven't had this one too long. This came from Lynn, repotted 3rd of the 9th 22, and I had it very soon after that. I'm not going to bother looking the date up. So it's in new media. It's in a mix of bark and grow stones for the look of it. That's fine for these. It is currently not growing. Being a Latoria type, it would prefer to stay warmer than it is in here now. So there's no new growth on it, but new growths have matured recently. It is blooming size. It's quite a sizable division, quite honestly. If it's a division, it might have been just a spare one, because Lynn tends to grab, if it's got Dendrobium on the label, I'll have that. But what is important on this one is look at your plant. Now you look at that and it just looks, it's just, okay, it's a dendrobium. No, it's not. It's got something special about it. What it's got is a cane that's changes colour halfway up. And if I squeeze that bit, it's not firm. And if I squeeze that bit, it's soft. This cane is rotting. So this cane's got to come off at the base now. The others are fine. It's just the one. Yeah. So this one has roots in the centre of the pot. It hasn't grown any new ones yet. It will be waiting for better temperatures, and hopefully when we get out into next year it will pick up. So species, it is convolutum. But yeah, Latoria types, they can grow in the home. They like to stay warm. They like medium bright light, not too bright. They will singe. And they're another one that if you can't keep the temperatures up, then you need to watch your watering, because in the cooler temperatures they'll stop. And if they stop and you water them, you rot the roots. So you've got to cut that water right back. This is just going to get a trickle, just to stop it dehydrating. You know, so that it's got some moisture to pass up slowly and slowly through the plant, keep its metabolism ticking over. But it's not growing, so it doesn't need much. But it will pick up, I suspect, in the new year. So adjust your watering to the plant. What's your plant doing? If this was in the appropriate temperatures, it would be growing new growths by now and starting some new roots. But I haven't got those temperatures, so it'll have to wait. And while it's waiting, I've got to go very careful with it. So yeah, Latoria types, light warmth, medium to bright light. Don't water them if they're not growing. Don't feed them if they're not growing. When they're in active growth, they will drink and feed quite nicely and push on quite hard. And if they're in the right conditions, they'll probably continuously grow. There'll be new growth coming, growth maturing, some pushing out spikes, some in bloom. You can have everything going on at once in a strong, healthy plant in the right conditions. I haven't got the right conditions, so mine stopped growing. Well, it hasn't, let's put it this way, it hasn't really started. So Latoria types, well worth having. Some of the blooms are scented, some of them have some very strange shapes, but yeah, I like them. So Latoria types. Right, this one is a Prosthetia, and they sit very loosely on the edge of the Callia alliance, sort of. They have a lot of trouble with these because they're always being reclassified, and they come in and out of epidendrums, encyclias, Prosthetias. They keep chopping and changing. So what you buy it as, when you repot it, it might be called something different. It's that bad. But this is one that seems to be hanging on to Prosthetia. It's radiata. First noticed at Burnham when several of their large basketful specimen plants were in the Orchid Paradise all in bloom at the same time. And whereas I tracked them down and thought they were absolutely wonderful, Hannah had to go out because it gave her a throbbing headache. It's a very, very powerful fragrance. Sweet, almost sickly, so it doesn't appeal to everybody. It's not unpleasant, but it's strong, very strong. And this is coming to the end of its life in this pot. This has not been repotted by me. It hadn't long been split by Arthur at Burnham's again, but it's coming to the edge of the pot. These latest two growths have yet to produce their root system. I think they've just done some of it, but whatever roots those two growths have produced have gone down in the pot, and that's the last roots that will be in the pot. Whatever these two growths do next, which is probably bloom, after that, when they shoot out, that's got to go in new media. The other side of the plant has only got a single lead. Can't remember whether that's already bloomed or not. But it's heading off in two directions, so when it's repotted it will be cut in the middle. but with these it does pay to retain the older bulbs and keep the strength up. But so these like quite bright light, not stupid bright, but quite bright light. When growing they'll drink and feed, but they will have periods when they're doing nothing, and this is just about to come into that period. Yeah, these growths aren't fully mature yet, the bulbs haven't reached their full size, so there's still something going on in the plant. Consequently it's going to get some reasonable water now. I'm not on a feed run today, everything's just getting flushed. I don't feed much this time of year. But yeah, I think they're very worthwhile growing, the Prosthechias. You can call them the upside down orchids if you like, because the lip tends to be at the top, with the petals and sepals, you know, hanging down sort of thing. Not all of them, but you know, quite a few of them. And as I said, they're very fragrant, or most of them. So that's one of those. Now I've pulled this one out as an example of a type of Oncidium. Now this was bought labelled Cambria, that was it, Cambria. Which is like, it's been hijacked, that word, to be a generic word for orchid, but trying to sound a bit flashier than just orchid. But it means nothing, basically. But this is an example of an Oncidium that insists on climbing. There are some that do that. You can see this latest growth here has a spike, which is good, because it hadn't bloomed for a while. The old bulb shriveled badly. This did not like being repotted at all. It lost its roots. And if you see one that climbs like this, the chances are it's one that needs pretty high humidity, because it generates a lot of aerial roots. In doing so, it's telling you, I need high humidity, or I come from a cloud forest environment, because not all Oncidiums are warm growers. Yeah, a lot in the Oncidium Alliance, like the Odonts and things like that, come from cloud forest regions and high elevations. Not all come from steamy jungle stuff, but some do. Some come from open deciduous forests. There's a right mix going on in the Alliance. It is vast and varied. But this is an example of one that climbs. And to accommodate the climbing growths before I repot it, I put a load of moss round the base of those growths, so that these roots had something to get into while they headed on down into the media. This desperately needs repotting now. The pot is absolutely full of algae. And when it gets repotted, it will be adjusted so that a lot of these aerial roots can get in some media. Now, you might think, oh, well, when I repot it, I'll just make sure that these growths are, you know, right in the media like that. That may kill that root system, because you've changed it from an aerial root to suddenly being inside media, and it may just object to that change and die. So you've got to go steady what you're up to. But anyway, this one's going to bloom, and the blooms on this are absolutely stunning, which is why I've struggled with the flipping thing, but it really does need a repot. Some of these roots have got active green tips on them, so although this is pushing a spike up, this might not be a bad time to repot. Another indicator is we have a new growth here and another one here. So this has got two new growths coming, one over here that's maturing with a spike, and the previous one over here isn't going to bloom. Did it bloom? Oh, it did. Okay. So that could do with repotting, so I will mark that one. But when I water this now, the moss and these aerial roots will get a good soaking. That's why the pot's full of algae, because to do that, the pot's too wet. So the media needs changing. That will be done. Anyway, so that's an intergeneric that's probably got some sort of Odontoglossum in it, just looking at the blooms. Probably got Miltonia in it as well. It could be a right hodgepodge, but as I said, the climbers are a bit difficult to accommodate. My idea once was, oh well, if it's a climber it's going to do much better on a mount. Well, it doesn't. The two that I tried didn't actually do well on a mount, quite honestly. The chances are that was because there are times of the year when I don't water the mounts every day, whereas those probably needed to be watered every day. You know, there's only so much you can do. Anyway, watch out for the word Cambria. It can have a multitude of sins hiding behind that word. You could end up with a cool grower, you could end up with a high light, low light, warm grower, climber. There's all sorts in amongst that, hiding behind that name. Anyway, that's an example of one that climbs and what I try and do to accommodate that type of Oncidium alliance type thing. Nemesis number 2, Zygopetalums. This I know I've got one in bloom over there that's quite a nice plant. This one isn't. That's why I picked this one. Plus, as I'm going around watering, I'm coming to a point where I'm going to take a break. Coffee and biscuits time. And on that particular shelf there are no new ones to film apart from this. So that's why I picked on this one. It gives me a break. And I'm going to take the stuff off the camera now and see how much I've got, because it might be that that's good enough for today's video, and then what I film the rest of the day while I'm finishing off watering can be tomorrow's video. Anyway, this is heavy on the cocoa husk, and although given quite good instructions on how to treat these, and that was part of it, get them in the cocoa husk, the roots absolutely love it. Yes and no. Yes, they do, and it saved some of my plants at repot time and allowed them to grow on better that they had never done before. But I do have a problem that it breaks down relatively quickly, which means I've got to repot quite often. And it's the repotting in the past that has killed my plants. The roots are so easily bruised and damaged, and you know they break in sections, that takes the plant down. So I'm in a catch-22 with my zygos. I want to get rid of the cocoa husk because it means repotting too frequently, and the roots can be easily damaged during repot. But they have done better since I used it, so it's a bit of a catch-22 here. Not sure what to do yet, decision not made. But this one ought to have a repot in the near future because it currently has a new growth here, halfway up that cane, and another new growth here. And it did bloom on the last growths. So it's not growing as well as it should, but it was bought as a not too clever plant to see if I could get it to recover. Well, it's going to recover a lot better if those new growths get into some new media. So I'm going to have to bite the bullet and repot that and take out the cocoa husk. And who knows, I might substitute it with an amount of the Welsh moss in there to help hold moisture. We'll see how it goes. Zygos are a mixed bag because some of them grow quite high up in the trees in quite bright light and are obviously epiphytes. Some of them grow down in the leaf litter on the ground and would be classed as semi-terrestrial. And when it just says Zygopetalum hybrid, you don't know what you've got. Anyway, reasonable light. The thing is, the trick with these is to get them to be vigorous, and to get them to be vigorous they need brighter light than it says, because these are classed as shady growers. Yeah, well, give them more light, give them a bit more warmth than perhaps it says, and feed and water well and make them grow. Yeah, and under those conditions they should do it. But if you keep them in a semi-state of stall because they're either not quite warm enough or they haven't quite got as much light as they could do with, they will grow slowly, and when they grow slowly they don't get very good root systems and they're easily taken down at repot time. So anyway, that's not a good example, deliberately chosen as it's not a good example, plus it's convenient where I've got to. So if that is the last clip, I'll see you in the next video. If it's not, there'll be another one straight after.